What would you do if the child you sacrificed everything for, the child you raised alone, worked double shifts for, gave your last dollar to, sent you a text message 3 days before her wedding, telling you to stay home? Not a phone call, a text. I am going to tell you exactly what I did. And I need you to hear the whole thing before you decide whether I was wrong. Because what happened next, what I discovered, what I decided, and what I put into motion changed everything. Not just for me, for all of them. My name is Diane Calloway. I am 56 years old, and 3 days before my only daughter's wedding, after I had already contributed $5,300 toward the celebration, booked my hotel room, bought my dress, and counted down the days on a calendar the way I used to mark her school events when she was small, my daughter sent me a text telling me not to come. The message read, "Mom, Brandon and his family feel that having you at the ceremony might create some tension. We think it might be best if you watched the live stream from home. We'll make it up to you after. I promise." I read it 3 times. I kept looking for the follow-up, the part where she said she was kidding, the part that explained what tension even meant, because I had spent 30 years doing nothing but keeping the peace. There was no follow-up. But before I tell you what I did, you need to understand who I am and what I had built, because without that, none of the rest of this will make the kind of sense it needs to make. I spent 22 years as an office manager for a pediatric clinic in our town. I am a widow, and I have been doing everything alone for a long time. My husband, Patrick, died 9 years ago. He was 51. Heart attack. No warning. One morning, he was making coffee and complaining about the neighbor's leaf blower, and by that afternoon, he was gone. We had been married for 19 years. We had one daughter, Kayla. She was 22 when we lost him. Just graduated, just starting her life. And suddenly, the 2 of us were standing in a funeral home, picking out a casket for a man neither of us had been remotely prepared to lose. Patrick was the kind of man people wrote speeches about at retirement parties and actually meant every word. He coached Little League for 11 years. He volunteered at the food pantry every Thanksgiving without being asked. He fixed the gutters of our elderly neighbor Helen every single fall, because he said someone had to, and it might as well be him. When he died, over 400 people came to the visitation. I remember standing in that room thinking, I knew he was a good man, but I did not know the full size of him until I saw everyone he had touched standing in the same space. 3 years after Patrick passed, I used his life insurance, a chunk of my 401k, and a small business loan to open a learning center for children in our community. I named it after him, the Patrick Calloway Learning Center. It was not fancy. It was a renovated space with 5 rooms, a reading nook, an outdoor area with picnic tables and a garden the kids helped plant themselves, and a staff of 7 people who treated every child like they mattered, because they did. We offered after-school programs, summer sessions, and tutoring for kids who were falling behind. We kept our rates low on purpose. For families who truly could not afford it, we had a scholarship fund that Patrick's old colleagues helped me build from donations. That center became something I could not have predicted when I first signed the lease. It became the kind of place where parents cried at year-end recitals, not because of the performances, but because they remembered what their child had been like before, and could see clearly what they had become. It was the best work of my life. And Patrick's name was above the door, so that every single child who walked in would know someone believed in building something worth walking into. Kayla helped me in the early years. She painted rooms on weekends. She ran the social media. She drove across town with me to pick up donated supplies and never complained once. Those years were hard, but they were ours. And then she met Brandon. I want to be fair about Brandon. I genuinely do, because fairness is something I have always believed in, even when it costs me something. Brandon was good-looking, confident, in that easy, practiced way of someone who had never really been told no. He worked in finance. His family had money, not generational wealth, but the kind of new money that announces itself constantly in the car you drive, the restaurants you choose, and the way you talk about other people's choices. He was polite to me, always. Polite in the way that keeps you from saying anything directly, because you cannot point to a single specific thing, only a feeling, a low, persistent hum of being assessed and found slightly lacking. His mother, Carol, was the kind of woman who said, "Oh, how lovely," about things she did not find lovely at all. She had perfect hair, perfect posture, and a way of steering conversations away from anything that threatened her preferred version of events. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself Kayla was happy, and happy was what mattered. I kept telling myself that, right up until the text message arrived. The wedding planning started about 8 months before the date. Brandon's family took the lead almost immediately. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the florist, all of it selected, approved, and announced before I had been consulted on a single detail. I did not make it an issue. It was Kayla's wedding. My preferences were not the point. What I did offer, what Kayla specifically asked me to offer, was money. She called me one Sunday afternoon, her voice doing that particular thing it does when she wants something and is trying to make the asking feel casual. "Mom, you know the catering ended up being a lot more than we budgeted. Brandon's parents are covering the venue and the bar, but the food and the rentals are kind of falling on us. Is there any way you could help out?" I said yes before she finished the sentence, because that is what I do. That is what I have always done. The total came to $5,300. I sent it in 2 transfers. I did not ask for a receipt. I did not ask for a thank you. I sent it the way you send money to someone whose happiness you have spent your entire adult life funding, without hesitation and without conditions. I bought my dress 2 months in advance. Dusty rose, knee-length, tasteful. I tried it on so many times that the dry cleaner's bag wore through at the hanger. I arranged my travel, booked a hotel room near the venue, counted down the days on a calendar I kept on the refrigerator with a little star on the wedding date, the way I used to mark her school events when she was small. And then, 72 hours before the ceremony, the message came. Mom, Brandon and his family feel that having you at the ceremony might create some tension. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood at the sink, staring out the window at the backyard. The bird feeder Patrick hung the summer before he died was still there, still full, because I still filled it every week, out of habit or memory, or something I have never quite been able to name. I picked the phone back up and called Kayla. It rang 4 times, voicemail. I called again, 4 rings, voicemail. 3rd call. She picked up. Mom? Her voice was flat in a way I had never heard from her before. Practiced, like she had been coached on exactly how to sound. I did not yell. I did not panic. I asked her one question, as clearly as I could. Kayla, am I being removed from your wedding? A silence that lasted long enough to be its own answer. It's not like that. Carol just feels like... It's a whole thing. There's a lot of family dynamics on their side, and she thinks having extra... She thinks it'll be smoother if the guest list is more contained. I asked her if she agreed with that. She said, I just want the day to go well. I told her I understood, and I ended the call. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Kayla did homework for 12 years, where we ate Christmas morning breakfast, where I signed the original lease for the learning center, and she handed me a pen and said, Dad would be so proud of you, Mom. I did not cry right away. Something harder than tears moved through me. Something that felt less like a breaking and more like a door closing with a very quiet, very final click. The wedding was on a Saturday in October. I watched it on my laptop, at my kitchen table, in the dusty rose dress I had bought 2 months before. The venue was beautiful. String lights across a high ceiling, white flowers everywhere. The kind of wedding that photographs well and looks exactly like what people pin on vision boards. I watched Carol in the front row, in the seat that should have been mine, smiling for the photographer with the practiced ease of a woman who had gotten exactly what she wanted. Kayla walked down the aisle on Brandon's father's arm. There was no father to walk with her. Apparently, no mother either. She looked beautiful. I want to say that clearly and without any bitterness at all, because it is true. She was the most beautiful I had ever seen her. I smiled at the screen, because I did not know what else to do with my face. When the ceremony ended, I closed the laptop. I took off the dress. I hung it in the closet. I made a cup of tea, sat in the kitchen until it went cold, and then poured it down the drain, and went to bed. That night, I made a decision, not out of anger, out of something much quieter, much more certain. I decided that what I had built, with Patrick's memory and my own 2 hands, would never be handed over to people who saw it as an asset on a spreadsheet. Not ever. 9 days after the wedding, Kayla called. Warm. Easy. The way she gets when she has decided the difficult part is over, and it is time to return to normal. Whatever normal means, after something like that. She told me about the honeymoon, said Brandon's family had really warmed up, said I would love them once I got to know them, said we should plan a dinner soon. And then Brandon got on the line. I had not expected that. The shift was immediate. He was friendly, in that deliberate, transactional way that tells you someone has rehearsed the opening but is fully prepared to negotiate. Diane, I wanted to run something by you. My family has some connections in commercial real estate development, and they've had their eye on a few properties in your area. Someone flagged the building where the learning center operates. Great location, high foot traffic. The numbers are genuinely strong. They're prepared to make a very fair offer. I said nothing. He kept going. You'd get a meaningful cut of the sale. We're talking enough to retire on comfortably. And honestly, Diane, you've been running that place for years. You've done more than your share. You deserve to rest. And then Kayla's voice. Light. Casual. Like she was talking about rearranging furniture. Mom, you really can't run it forever. This could be really good for you. I held the phone. Outside my kitchen window, a mom was walking her daughter up the path to the center's front door. The little girl was wearing a backpack twice the size of her body and holding a juice box with both hands. She stopped to look at something on the ground, a bug maybe, or a leaf, and her mom waited for her, without rushing her. Patrick's name was above the door, in the font I had chosen myself. Clean, permanent. You can't run it forever. I told Brandon I would think about it. I ended the call. I stayed at that window for a long time. That evening, I drove to the center. I let myself in after hours and walked through every room alone. The kids' drawings were still up on the bulletin boards. Crayon houses, lopsided suns, family portraits where everyone had circular heads and enormous smiles. The reading nook had a worn armchair the kids had unofficially claimed as the story chair. Whoever sat in it got to pick the book. The whole place smelled like dry erase markers and graham crackers, and something I can only describe as effort, the specific smell of a place where people are genuinely trying. I went to my office. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I almost never opened anymore, and I found the original file from the day we incorporated, the loan documents, the business registration, the first lease. And between two folders, a birthday card. Patrick had given it to me the year we first started talking about building something in his name. On the inside, in his handwriting, he had written, "Whatever you build, Diane, build it to last. Love, P." That was all. I sat in my office chair and did not move for a long time. When I finally stood up, something inside me had gone completely still. Not numb, still. The kind of still that comes after a decision has already been made, and the only thing left is to follow through. The next morning, I called my attorney. Her name is Sandra Pruitt. She has handled my legal needs for 11 years, and she is exactly the kind of woman you want in your corner. Methodical, calm, and completely unbothered by the idea of confrontation. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Diane, there is a clean way to handle this.
a nonprofit charitable trust. Once the center is formally placed inside a properly structured trust, it cannot be sold. It cannot be developed. It cannot be claimed as part of your estate by anyone, family included. It becomes legally protected, in perpetuity. I asked whether Kayla could challenge it. Sandra said, "Not if we do this correctly, and we will do this correctly." I told her to start the paperwork immediately. The calls from Kayla and Brandon continued over the following days, and I watched the tone shift, the way weather shifts, gradual, then sudden. First, it was patient, Brandon explaining the opportunity again, slowly, like I had not understood the first time. Then it was Kayla, softer, trying a different angle. "Mom, I just feel like you're holding on to something out of guilt. Dad would want you to take care of yourself." Then it was frustrated, a voicemail from Brandon that he clearly left right after a glass of something, saying I was being irrational, that this kind of thinking was exactly why people ended up house rich and cash poor. Then came a text from Kayla. "Mom, please don't make decisions out of emotion. We're trying to help you."
I read that one twice. I had worked for 7 years to build something that served over 90 families in our community. I had taken out a loan at 49 years old, a loan, because I believed a thing was worth building. I had hired staff, raised scholarship funds, attended every single year-end celebration, stayed late, come in early, done the parts of the job that nobody sees and nobody thanks you for. And they were calling it emotion. I did not respond. I met with Sandra 3 times that week. We went through every page together. When she set the final document in front of me and handed me a pen, she asked if I was ready. I told her I had been ready since the night I sat in my office and read that birthday card. I signed, and signed again. Every page that needed my name. Got it. When it was done, Sandra sealed everything into an envelope. "Filed with the state by end of week," she said. "After that, there is nothing anyone can do." My phone buzzed on her desk. "Kayla." I picked it up. I answered on speaker. Her voice was urgent, slightly breathless, like someone who had just realized they were running out of time and had not prepared for that possibility. "Mom, please, just talk to us before you do anything. I'm sorry about the wedding, okay? I know that was wrong, I know. But please don't make a decision you can't take back. Just wait." I looked at the sealed envelope on Sandra's desk. "Kayla," I said, "I need you to listen to me." "I'm listening." "The center has been placed into a permanent charitable trust. It is named after your father. It cannot be sold, developed, subdivided, or transferred to any individual, including you, including Brandon, including anyone connected to his family. It is protected, permanently." The silence that followed was one of the longest I have ever sat inside. Then her voice, smaller than I had heard it since she was a child. "What did you do, Mom?" "I protected what your father and I built," I said, "the way I should have protected myself a long time ago." Brandon's voice erupted in the background. He said they would get a lawyer. He said I had lost my mind. He said I had just thrown away a life-changing amount of money, out of spite. Sandra leaned forward calmly. "Brandon, any legal challenge to this trust will be unsuccessful. The structure is airtight. It has been properly filed. There is nothing to contest. I would recommend consulting your own counsel before making any further statements, but I can tell you now, the outcome will be the same. The line went quiet. I ended the call. I thanked Sandra, picked up my bag, walked out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The sky was gray and low, the way it gets in late fall. Leaves on the sidewalk, a cold that had just started meaning it. I drove home. Made dinner. Ate it while it was still hot, which was something I had not done in weeks. I slept deeply that night. The first time in longer than I could track. The legal threats materialized briefly and dissolved quickly. Brandon's family connected with an attorney who reviewed the trust documents and advised them with some directness that there was no viable path forward. The structure was airtight. The trust was irrevocable. The conversation was over. The calls stopped by the end of the second month. Kayla and I did not speak for nearly 6 months. That silence was the hardest part of all of this. Harder than the wedding, harder than signing the papers, harder than any of the confrontations. Because she was still my daughter. Because I still set 2 coffee cups out of habit some mornings, and had to put one back. 7 months after the wedding, I got a call from a mutual family friend. Kayla and Brandon were separating. The development deal Brandon's family had been pursuing had collapsed when their primary investor pulled out. Several of their other ventures had followed. The financial pressure had fractured the marriage, faster than anyone had anticipated. About 2 months after that, a card arrived in my mailbox. No return address. But I knew Kayla's handwriting before I even turned it over. I sat on the front steps and opened it. She had written on every available surface, the inside, the back, the margins. The handwriting was fast and uneven, like she had written it all at once, before she could talk herself out of it. She wrote about the wedding. She said she had known, even as she sent that text, that she was doing something she would not be able to undo. She said Carol had spent 2 years, quietly, persistently, reframing the way Kayla saw me, making my involvement feel like interference, my presence feel like pressure, until Kayla had stopped questioning it entirely. She wrote about thriving past the learning center one evening, after everything fell apart. She said she sat in the parking lot for almost 45 minutes. She watched the staff leave. She watched the lights go off, one by one. She sat there and looked at Patrick's name above the door and cried in a way she had not let herself cry since the week he died. The last thing she wrote was this: "Mom, I know I can't fix what I did. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I just need you to know that I see it now. All of it. I see what you and Dad built. I see what you protected. And I see you. I'm so sorry. I love you." I folded the card and held it against my chest and stood in my front yard in the late afternoon quiet. The bird feeder was full. A chickadee landed on the edge of it, looked at me sideways the way birds do, and flew off. I went inside. I put the card in the drawer with Patrick's birthday message. And then I sat down and cried. In a way, I had not let myself cry through any of it. Not the text, not the live stream, not the phone call in Sandra's office. I cried the way you cry when the emergency is finally over, and your body remembers. It is allowed to feel things again. Spring came, and the center had its best enrollment year since we opened. We received a county grant that allowed us to hire 2 additional part-time tutors. The scholarship fund covered 11 families at no cost for the full year. A local business donated new furniture for the reading nook. Someone dropped off a box of books one morning with a note that said, "For the kids," and nothing else. Patrick's name was still above the door. It was always going to be above the door.
Kayla and I began talking again, slowly, carefully. Not the way we talked before. That version of us was gone, and I think we both understood that. But something new was starting in its place. Something that had more honesty in it than we had probably ever managed before. She came over for dinner one evening in March. We cooked together in the kitchen, without talking much at first. And then the quiet became easier, and the conversation started finding its way in. We did not talk about Brandon. We did not talk about the trust. We did not talk about the wedding. We talked about Patrick. She told me she had forgotten how he used to whistle the same 3 bars of a song over and over without ever finishing it, how it used to drive her crazy, and how she would give anything to hear it now. I laughed. A real one, the kind that catches you off guard. After she left, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time. I thought about everything it had cost me to get to that moment. Not in money, in the quieter currencies. Trust, sleep, the particular kind of hope you carry for a relationship you have poured yourself into. And I thought about Patrick, about the birthday card in the drawer, about what he said about building things to last. I had done that, in more ways than he probably meant when he wrote it. Here is what I know now that I did not know at the beginning of all this. Love is not measured by how much you give. It is revealed by whether what you give is valued. When someone treats your sacrifice as an expectation, when your presence is treated as a liability, when everything you built is described as just a transaction waiting to happen, the most powerful thing you can do is go very still, and then act with complete clarity. I did not fight loudly. I did not send angry messages. I did not make scenes. I simply decided what mattered, and I protected it. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, out of the kind of love that is old enough and steady enough to hold its ground, even when holding its ground costs you something. If you are watching this right now and something in this story feels familiar, if you have given and given to someone who made you feel like your sacrifice was invisible, I want you to hear this. What you have built matters. What you have carried matters. The life you have created with your grief and your hope and your work, that is worth protecting. And protecting it is not selfish. It is the most honest form of love you have left. I am Diane Calloway. I kept the promise I made to my husband, and I am still here. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below. I read every single one. Share it with someone who needs it to hear today. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button, because every week I bring you stories about what we carry, who we really are, and what we are strong enough to protect. I will see you in the next one.